Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from around the world. My name is Richard Anderson. I'm the founder and CEO of ShareVault. I would like to thank you for joining our webinar today, and I will be introducing our speaker momentarily. This is the 20th in ShareVault's webinar series, and today's topic is the Seller's Guide to M&A HR. Today's presentation is especially timely given the very active merger and acquisition market we are all experiencing today. This increased volume of transactions is closely correlated with much higher activity levels in corporate development, finance, legal, HR, and M&A integration. Whether a transaction is buy-side, acquisition-oriented, or a sell-side driven divestiture, or some sort of resource realignment, such as an outsourcing initiative, a significant amount of highly confidential information must be managed across diverse organizations. Effective due diligence and tightly managed communications are paramount. And in the era of blogging, Facebook, and Twitter, this can be a daunting challenge. One leaked memo can have serious ramifications for the deal. A frequent question we at ShareVault are asked by our customers who are involved in these types of transactions is, how can I effectively streamline and secure information flows to ensure a great outcome for all stakeholders? We will explore these very timely topics shortly, but let me first briefly cover a few logistical items. First, although your individual audio will be muted in order to minimize background noise, we do encourage you to submit questions at any time during today's presentation via the question box located in your webinar control panel. Secondly, there will be a question and answer session following the presentation, and questions which are not addressed during this forum will be responded to via email after the webinar. And lastly, our speaker has generously offered to make today's presentation available for download. You will be notified by email when the presentation is posted, and login procedures will be provided to you. You'll then be able to access the presentation by logging into a ShareVault secure document sharing system. We at ShareVault specialize in supporting the types of collaborative business processes and transactions which our speaker will cover today, and we are pleased to have the opportunity to provide a forum for discussing these important topics. We have a full agenda for today's presentation and discussion, and we'll begin the presentation following a brief demonstration and then move to an interactive Q&A session. Now, let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce Brian Moriarty, the Vice President of Human Resources for Mergers, Acquisitions, Divestitures, and Outsourcing at Hewlett-Packard. Brian is a recognized authority in strategic planning, corporate development, M&A, and integration. He leads a group at HP which provides and coordinates HR services for M&A and outsourcing activities, with the goal of tailoring their integration approaches to best meet business objectives and thereby maximize customer satisfaction. Brian brings to the HR function an extensive experience in M&A transactions, having closed more than 50 M&A deals, constituting a transactional volume of more than $25 billion. Prior to HP, Brian worked as the VP of Business Affairs and M&A at Sun Microsystems. In his role at Sun, leading the M&A execution and acquisition integration group, one of Brian's main goals was to ensure that acquired groups had as smooth a landing as possible into Sun. And from the vantage point of his role as an M&A executive and from his experiences firsthand in helping very large, complex organizations establish growth plans and execute against them, Brian has much to share with us today. We are very pleased to be with you, Brian, to learn from you as we discuss these very timely business topics. So, welcome, and please feel free to begin your presentation.
Hey, great. Thanks a lot, Richard. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk in this forum, and happy to help. Absolutely. So the way that we've structured this presentation is in the form of what's going to work in a schoolyard. What are the 5 rules of the schoolyard? Kind of a kindergartner's guide to HR M&A, if you will, to help people consider this and think about it. So the 5 rules I wanted to talk to you about today: brush your teeth, attitude is everything, just take your fair share, don't hoard your toys, and mum is the word to a point. So brush your teeth. What do I mean by this? What I mean is build a solid foundation for your company and try to keep it clean. So I'm often asked, are there HR issues that really kill deals, that people will terminate deals over? And really the only thing that comes to mind in answer to that are ethical lapses. right? Questionable ethics that we uncover when we're doing due diligence. These can involve harassment, knowing that things are falsified, lying on public filings, flagrant violation of contracts, things like this that we uncover in the course of due diligence. Because oftentimes when we find one thing in a compressed due diligence environment, our thinking is that where there's smoke, there's fire, and there's probably other issues out there too. For most big acquirers, ethical lapses just can't be tolerated in our companies, and it's the number one kind of HR issue, I'd call it, that will chill, if not completely kill a deal. Now, beyond that, there are other things that in isolation won't kill deals most often, but definitely have a ramification on structuring and how economics and risks are shared across the deals. For instance, in an HR setting, not complying with labor laws, obviously it's illegal, but it will show up on a buyer's due diligence report that they take to their management team, likely with dollars of exposure. Some of the things that I see small privately held companies struggle with often are how to treat hourly workers in compliance with the Fair Labor Standards Act. This is exempt versus non-exempt, and who may be overtime eligible. How contract workers are treated. Are they actually real employees in disguise? And also how workers are treated outside the U.S., because there's different jurisdictions have different classifications for how they look at employees. There's different labor laws, and you have to know those if you're operating in those environments. Now, again, a few violations here and there likely won't kill a deal, but oftentimes there will be an assessment of what the liability is, and that's going to show up either in the purchase price or more frequently kind of in more stringent post-closing protections in the reps and warranties and subsequent escrow. So, and then lastly on this topic, I would just encourage everyone, keep good records and do the best you can to maintain standards. And so diligence periods are compressed. They go by really quickly. It helps so much to have a repository on hand of signed contracts, scanned signed contracts, not just the templates that may have been submitted to an employee, but the ones that are signed. A well-documented and legally compliant equity structure and cap table and option plans. And then also, as you know, with employment agreements, most companies have templates and standards provided to them by attorneys or whatnot. Try to stick to them to the extent possible, obviously. To the extent there are deviations, make sure you track what the deviations are, because that's the first thing that a buyer is going to ask for. They're going to ask for, well, what's your template? What's your deviations, right? And so your ability to kind of quickly access these is super helpful in a diligence setting. Okay, next topic is attitude is everything. And so I think this might be kind of obvious, but it's definitely worth saying. It's not an exit for the buyer. We really appreciate that the seller and the seller shareholders are going to be pretty rewarded, in many cases richly rewarded. But I think you have to bear in mind it's not an exit for us. It's really the beginning. We're excited about the future, and we need you and your team to help achieve our plans. We need you and your people to advance your products. You know them best. The architecture, the function, the future roadmaps, and with that knowledge and your knowledge of the market, we also need your help in approaching and selling to our customers. Yes, oftentimes we have thousands, if not tens of thousands of people in go-to-market organizations, which is terrific. But they already have a quota. They already have a bag of things that they're trying to carry. What we need are people from the acquired company and the sales organization who are evangelists for the acquired product, because with that you can grow the share of sales in a sales organization from there if you have some really good evangelists. We need someone who's going to be, or people that are going to advocate your group within our company. And then lastly, oftentimes people think there's not going to be a role for me at a big company, or boy, I've been in charge of this division or this company for a long time. I don't want to do it in the confines of a big company. And so what I'd ask you to think about is, in many circumstances, we have found larger roles for people than just managing the division that they were brought into. And the reason for that is because generally, if you work at a big company and you've worked at a big company for a long time, you've grown up in a function, engineering, marketing, sales, etc. But there's very few opportunities to be a general manager. And so there's a lack of great general management skills in big companies, oftentimes. And that's what CEOs, especially of acquired companies, have. They have that great general management experience. And so I'd encourage you to keep an open mind in that setting. In terms of timing, and this gets back to attitude, we understand that you're not committing to us forever, but we expect it to be a year, 2 years, a few years, right? So oftentimes we'll offer inducements to stay, and those can range from stay bonuses to best utilizing the unvested options that already exist in your company. And then also in certain circumstances, buyers ask sellers to hold back a portion of their consideration, and it won't be paid out for a year or two, depending on certain criteria like continued employment with the buyer. And then lastly, how hard to push. M&A negotiations can be really tense. They can be super confrontational. I live that, totally get it. You have to think about this aspect of it, the HR aspect of it, as more a negotiation with a future employer and someone that you're going to have an ongoing relationship with. And so absolutely ask for what's important to you and try to maintain that as best you can, but realize that there's an end to the negotiation, and when there's an end to it, you have to basically make up your mind whether you're going to commit to it or not. But your behavior in these negotiations is watched pretty carefully by the buyer, because they're trying to assess if you're someone that they can work with going forward. I'll give you an example. There was one company that years ago we looked at, not at HP, it was a predecessor, but we looked at pretty carefully. It was a small company. We liked everyone on board. We liked the CEO. We went through diligence. We started negotiating with the CEO about what he could do at our company and what his package would be and things like that. And he came back with an ask list that was huge. Okay, I get that. So we worked with him on that list and tried to explain what was doable in our organization, but he just wouldn't budge. That was kind of his list, and that was all. And the general manager of my company that was sponsoring the acquisition, after a week or two of back and forth, looked at me and said, "Not worth it. Just not worth it. We don't need him that bad. Let's cut him out. Let's move on with the deal." Because he's looking at it like this isn't a one-time negotiation. This is a relationship I'm trying to build with this guy going forward. And if this is how it's starting and this is the behavior the guy's exhibiting, we don't need him. So bear that in mind too. There's you have to know in this context how hard to push. Okay, just take your fair share. This gets around change of control provisions. Change of control provisions are elements of contracts that trigger when your company is sold. That while they can exist in commercial contracts, I'm only going to cover those that pertain to HR. So some of the dimensions, oftentimes we find these in employment offers. We find them in standalone change of control agreements once in a while, and sometimes they're in equity documents, either in plan documents or in stock grants themselves. So they're sprinkled throughout an organization. And I would encourage you to know exactly where these things are, because that's kind of the first question that someone's going to ask in a diligence session on HR. This is a real key topic for us. The triggers, what would trigger some of these benefits, usually are either a single trigger or a double trigger. A single trigger means that the benefits go to the employee if the company is sold. Double trigger means the benefits go to the employee if the company is sold and the executive is terminated. The consequences oftentimes are a set amount of severance or acceleration, either whole or in part, of equity vesting. So why do we care about that as a buyer? Well, first, just to put it on the table, single trigger to us isn't protection. We understand why employees need protection in certain circumstances. Single trigger isn't protection. It's basically a banker fee. It's kind of rewarding someone at the closing of a deal. It's not at all aligned to our interests. You know, I've seen this once in a while, especially when a CEO is brought in strictly to sell the company, but but for almost all circumstances, it's just not appropriate. Double trigger is much more common, protects employees. It just has to be balanced in terms of the dollars and duration. The bottom line is we're looking for people who are focused on work when they get to our company, not on what's going to trigger their change of control benefits, right? So what's fair? In our experience, at least my experience, I can't speak for anyone besides me in this regard, but I find double trigger acceleration can be pretty fair, partial acceleration of equity, severance once in a while depending on who it's for, limited to top executives. When it goes below that, you really have to question why that is, and also what the motivations are. And it's usually weighted, and I think this is most fair, it's usually weighted to the G&A people, to the people whose jobs, frankly, are probably most at risk in a change of control setting. You know, when we see change of control agreements for VPs of engineering, which frankly are usually the people we need the most, you know, we generally find that not appropriate. And then my counsel on this is these are easy to give, and so I find them all the time in deals. But when we find something that we just can't live with and that's egregious, we all got to renegotiate it. And that's in a deal setting when timelines are compressed and stress is high and the stakes are pretty high. So that's a bad time to have to do it. So I just counsel to you to use caution when deploying this tool. Okay, sharing your toys, or don't hoard your toys, rather, sharing employee information. So, you know, this revolves around, and this is a concern of most sellers. If I give the buyer information on my employees, they can come in and make offers to people if the deal doesn't work out, right? I hear this all the time. So what I will say is, you know, once in a while, and I'm not a lawyer, but once in a while I've seen this in non-disclosure agreements that there's a non-solicit provision in there. So these can be negotiated depending on the buyer. But I will say most big companies are very sensitive to this provision and will strive to take the teeth out of it. So by the time these get negotiated with big companies, the teeth is largely out of them. So I wouldn't rely strictly on, even if you have one, I wouldn't strictly rely on the non-solicit in an NDA necessarily. So what I encourage people to do is, as the deal evolves, gradually unveil more employee information. Maybe start with aggregate data, total salary, average salary, headcount by location, headcount by function, kind of all that stuff. Then move to, the next step would be anonymized data. So here's the list of all the employees, here's their salary, what their benefits are, where they work, kind of all the detail, but strip out the personally identifiable information. That helps a buyer a lot because they can then look at it and compare it to their salary structures and try to determine if, when your people come on board, if they're going to be happy with salary packages and job structures or not. And then lastly, move to full data, kind of unblinded information as the last step, and only when it's absolutely necessary. My experience is blinded but full data is generally okay. And you know, again, it depends on local law. This is kind of from a U.S. perspective. It has to be, you know, if you're dealing outside the U.S., you need to work with counsel because privacy laws are different overseas. But as long as it's compliant and it's not threatening to your business, it's the blinded information can take a buyer pretty far in the process. And then lastly, mum is the word to a point. So who should I tell and when about the deal? Who should I disclose? So the way I put it is, this is information you're once told your people can't unremember. It's like trying to unscramble the egg. It's impossible. And disclosure literally changes everything. And so my advice is have a plan for who you're going to disclose, when, stick to it, and if things get really hairy, you have to call audibles and move on, but try to have a deliberate plan before you start this. Now, what people weigh back and forth when deciding who to disclose are the positives of disclosure, which are, hey, it's transparent. It feels like the right way to run my business to be transparent about this information. It's a lot easier to operate when you have to pull people into meetings and you have to pull data. The operations are much easier. And frankly, it just feels right to many people, so it's very tempting. But the negatives are the first reaction a person has when they hear that their company is going to be sold are the me issues. Well, what's going to happen to me? Am I going to be fired? Are they going to take me? Are they going to change my pay? I didn't sign up to work for a big company. I wanted to work for this company. Are you going to be my boss on a continuing basis? So whether they voice these or not, immediately the me issues come to a person's mind. And it's hard to get beyond those until they're somewhat addressed. This can cause flight risk in some cases. And also, once you disclose someone, they're going to come back to you looking for updates. Whether you like it or not, they're, well, how's it going? And negotiations have an up and down, an ebb and flow. And having that kind of moral obligation to kind of update people as the deal goes on is pretty taxing. So my advice is figure out who you need to fulfill the due diligence requests and who do you need for management meetings, and limit it to those people. Swear them to secrecy, including colleagues and spouses. Don't tell your friends, don't tell colleagues. Frankly, don't tell your spouses even. And also keep a list of who is disclosed. I've seen people use a ruse in some cases that the buyer is actually there for a minority equity investment or a partnership interest. And so that's, I've seen that done with some effect too. I think that people look through that pretty quickly, but I've seen it done. And then how to deal with leaks, just from an HR perspective, if it gets out into your employee workforce. It's circumstance specific, but realize you don't have to confirm or deny anything, really. You can just say, look, we just don't comment on M&A at this company. I can't talk to you about it. It's hard to say. It's a little frustrating, but frankly, it can keep you out of hot water for a brief period of time. Okay, and then so just in summary, what are the rules here that we talked about? More guidelines, I guess, rather than rules. Brush your teeth, right? Keep your company clean. No ethical lapses. Adhere to HR regulations. Maintain good records. Minimize exceptions. Your attitude is everything. It's not an exit for us. Try to shape and participate in our future vision. Just take your fair share. We understand change of control provisions are okay, but you got to maintain discipline and don't get, my advice is don't get overly greedy with them. Don't hoard your toys, so decide when and how you're going to share employee information. And also, mum's the word, the disclosure that you have to your people. Again, this is information you can't unremember once you hear it as an employee, so have a plan. Realize that once you tell someone, the me issues are going to come up, and have a plan for how to address those. Stick to it, and then resist that urge for full transparency, because it really can get you in hot water. Okay, thank you. That's the fixed presentation.
Great, thank you, Brian. We're going to go ahead and move to a demonstration with David Mosley. David will go ahead and take us through that at this point in time. And as a reminder, folks that are attending, if you have questions, please feel free to submit any questions through the question box in your webinar control panel.
Great. Thank you, Brian and Richard. My name is David Mosley, and I'm Director of Sales at ShareVault. And I'll be walking you through a brief demonstration of ShareVault's virtual data room platform. ShareVault's a full-featured virtual data room service. The platform is designed to efficiently and intuitively support the dynamics and workflow of both buy and sell side transactions. So we're just getting logged in here. There's a confidentiality agreement just to remind your users that they're reviewing confidential and sensitive documentation. And that will land us on ShareVault's main Documents tab. And we're looking at a ShareVault setup for an M&A sell-side engagement. Our sellers' due diligence documents present professionally and are organized thoughtfully so that our acquirer and other principals involved in the deal can easily find documents of interest. Publishing or uploading documents into ShareVault is simple and fast. So if lead times are short, we can help sellers get organized very quickly. Sellers can simply drag and drop prepared folders into the staging area, and ShareVault will replicate folders in the data room and convert documents into secure and encrypted PDF. There we go. So we're just going to go out. We're going to find a group of documents here. There we go. We'll take this operations folder. And again, we're simply just going to drag and drop into the staging area. Drag into tags and then simply publish. And ShareVault, during this upload process, will convert over 350 file types into secure and encrypted PDF for us. As you can see, we're taken back to the main Documents tab where we can monitor ShareVault's progress in creating additional folders for us based on the folder structure on our computers and in creating a secure and encrypted version of anything that's not in PDF into PDF for us. ShareVault's full text search helps deal participants search for keywords in documents. For example, acquirers interested in the seller's liability might search for this keyword to help them more quickly surface the seller's documents addressing this topic. ShareVault equips the seller with a broad range of document security policies to help the seller prevent unwanted distribution of documents during the M&A process. To that end, sellers can keep documents encrypted in PDF, prevent printing, copy-paste, watermark every page of every document, and prevent documents from being saved as well. ShareVault's permissioning tool empowers the seller with the ability to control and select folders and documents that it wants to share with the acquirer. ShareVault's flexibility and granularity enables the seller to permission at the folder, subfolder, and document levels. ShareVault's privacy management tool helps sellers keep their data room participants' identities from becoming mistakenly revealed during due diligence. This can be especially important if the seller is running a competitive process involving competing interests, and participant anonymity is paramount to successfully closing the transaction. During the transaction, the seller can research and monitor the buyer's interests with the help of ShareVault's summary report. The summary report provides the seller with real-time deal intelligence regarding the buyer's interests, which can help inform the seller's conversations with the buyer throughout the process. The activity list is an audit trail of user activity that can be filtered by time, activity, group or user, and lastly by folder or subfolder. ShareVault's audit trail can help fulfill compliance requirements with regulatory bodies and also help mitigate disclosure risk. ShareVault's Q&A feature provides for private communication between buyers and sellers. Acquirers may have questions about the deal or specific documents that need further clarification. ShareVault's Q&A tool keeps that communication centralized and secure. This concludes our demonstration of ShareVault. If you'd like a more in-depth demonstration of our service, please contact ShareVault Sales.
Thank you, David, for giving us an overview of ShareVault and its functionality. And we'll go ahead and take some time to work through some questions. And thank you to those folks who have submitted questions. We'll go through them essentially in the order submitted, and we'll ask Brian. These all seem to be questions related to the topics that you covered, Brian. I don't see any data room questions so far, but the first one is, what do you mean by a legally compliant cap table? Everyone has a slightly different format, is what's here.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, maybe I was using shorthand. By legally compliant cap table, I didn't mean the actual spreadsheet or even the output of an equity edge or whatever program you might use to track your equity. I was thinking more holistically of the organic documents, the stock agreement that might be in place, and also the different stock grants that are in place, and that they're just legally compliant, clean, countersigned when appropriate. So it was more a reference to that than anything else.
Okay. The next question is, what are the current legal issues regarding assumption of employee options by the buying company?
Yeah, great question. And again, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really opine fully on it. I will say it's complicated. You got to get a lawyer to look at it. And also, my understanding is it varies by state law, jurisdictions, things like that. That said, most stock agreements, the stock plan agreements, have provisions for what happens in a change of control if a buyer does not assume the share plan. And so many of them say if the buyer doesn't assume the share plan, that the board has the opportunity to accelerate all the equity. Some say that the board has to accelerate all the equity, but that's more rare in our experience. And sometimes it's just silent, which means the board doesn't really have the authority to do that under the share charter. So I would assume they would have to amend that. Maybe that takes a shareholder vote. Not sure. But generally, it's in that the obligations of the seller's board are usually dictated by, or usually it's not dictated, but they're usually in the stock plan agreement itself.
Okay. Next question is, what are standard industry practices for retention bonuses?
Yeah, so it depends on the buyer. It depends on the deal, depends on the industry. You'll find that these are pretty highly variable. I do know some big Silicon Valley companies that say they never give retention bonuses, but I know other ones that say that they almost always give retention bonuses, and there's a spectrum in between. The ones that don't give bonuses will tell you that they've done research, and on when they did give bonuses, and frankly, it didn't significantly impact people's behavior, right? So they stayed or went anyway, regardless of the money. Other companies will tell you that that it does impact behavior. The way that I've always looked at it is, as companies, we give people equity, and it vests over time, depending on employment. We're paying people to stay in their seats to a certain extent, right? Through equity plans most often. Retention bonuses are akin to that. You're paying people to stay. They vary in size depending on how critical individuals are to a deal, and also the different levels they are at a company. And so it's really all across the map. Because the technology industry, and I'll include both information technology and biotechnology, in our industries, people and IP are really the critical assets of most transactions. And so retaining the people is critical. You'll find retention bonuses are more prevalent in those sectors than others.
Okay. The next question is, how often do you encounter the WARN Act, W-A-R-N, and what's the impact on closing?
Sure. So again, not a lawyer, but the WARN Act really is meant to deal with company shutdowns of a company or shutdowns of operation. And so it deals with terminating employees. And if I recall correctly, what it says is if you terminate some proportion of the people in an office or at a company, you have to give people, I think it's 60 days notice, and pay them for that notice period in addition to whatever severance obligations you might have. In an M&A setting, we run into this if there are layoffs associated with the deal, and usually those obligations occur post-closing. They don't occur when, as a buyer, you're buying the company if you're hiring everyone. Now, there are circumstances when buyers will say, look, we don't want to hire all, let's say, 100 of your people. Really, we just want 20 people. And so the seller is going to have an obligation to terminate the employment of, let's say, 80 people. I would imagine they probably have WARN Act notification obligations associated with that and can work through counsel with it. As a buyer post-closing, when we do layoffs, if WARN Act is necessary, we go through and provide WARN Act payments.
Okay. Next question is, it's for David, and it's a question related to the data room. And the question is, you talked about staged disclosure for employee information. What's the best mechanism within the data room for handling that staged disclosure?
Great. ShareVault's permissioning tool allows you, if you recall in the demonstration, to easily control access to folders and documents through ShareVault's permissioning tool. And then you can further control, if they can't see documents, how it is that you want them to interact with documents. And those are the security policies that are used to protect your documents. You can keep users in a view-only experience, or you can give them a privilege to print documents, or even for trusted parties, give access to documents in their native format.
All right. And then this one is for Brian. Shouldn't change of control agreements be separate agreements rather than part of employment agreements or stock option agreements?
Boy, I wish that was the case. It would make life so much easier in due diligence, but unfortunately it's not. Change of control provisions can lurk in many different types of documents. I have seen standalone change of control agreements that provide for some benefits if there is a change of control. That does happen. But much more frequently we find that those provisions embedded into contracts. I just discussed kind of what they are from an HR standpoint in stock agreements or stock grants occasionally, or employment agreements or offer letters. Once in a while we come across things where an employee claims that the manager promised it to him, so it's an oral obligation and we have to sort that out. And then, so they really appear all over. They can also appear in commercial agreements, and that's pretty frequent. So, stepping out of my boundaries a little bit, but in supply agreements, in customer agreements, your constituents want to have a right to modify a contract if your company is sold, right? Maybe it's not a non-event, but maybe you get sold to somebody that they really don't like and don't want to deal with and want to be able to terminate the contract. And so there's a change of control provision in those types of contracts. So they can lurk really everywhere. Unfortunately, I wish they were all in one place. It would make diligence a lot simpler.
Okay. The next question is for David. What if the deal doesn't go through? What are the best practices for making sure that the shared information remains confidential?
Right. So ShareVault's a password-protected, invite-only platform. Administrators have full control over how long participants can remain within the data room. Very easily to simply lock out users at the conclusion of a deal. And at the time, that the deal might revive, it's very easy to re-invite them in to do additional due diligence. We also have the ability to digitally shred documents in the event that you would like to, as an administrator, give some of your deal participants the ability to save documents to their machine so that they can do their own due diligence. But later fall out of the deal, we have the ability to essentially digitally shred that document so they no longer have access to it.
Okay. And then this one is for Brian. How do you manage an unfortunate leak that the deal is underway?
So I'm going to respond to that in the context of how you deal with employees, because that's more the subject of the webinar, but it certainly can have other contexts as well. The first line of defense, if appropriate, is to just say you don't comment on M&A rumors, right? And that's what almost all companies tell executives to say to the press, right? We just don't comment on M&A rumors. You don't confirm or deny. So that's the first line of defense. If that's not going to work for you for that particular instance, then you have to go ahead and disclose, right? You have to go ahead and tell them, and you have to tell them how confidential it is, why they can't tell anyone else. You have to be prepared to talk to them about those knee issues to the extent you can, and go through that. Again, you want to do everything you can to avoid that situation. You want to keep the fact that you're doing a deal confidential. But if you do enough of these deals, leaks inevitably happen from an employee standpoint, and you have to be prepared to manage them. From an overall company perspective, if you're a privately held company and a customer calls you or you see a leak in the press, you got to work with legal counsel on how to best respond to it. And most often, you probably have to work with if you're in exclusive negotiations with the buyer, you have to work with the buyer too to find the right path forward for that. Most often, it's, again, just saying we don't confirm or deny M&A rumors. But if it reaches a kind of a fevered pitch and there's just no way around it, you got to work with your legal counsel on how you can draft something that addresses that.
Thanks, Brian. And thanks, David. That concludes the time we had allotted for the Q&A session. Thanks to all those participants that submitted questions. If there are additional questions that come in, we'll respond to those and coordinate with Brian to respond to those as well. I want to thank you all for participating in today's webinar. As was mentioned earlier, the recording of the webinar will be made available to you, and you'll be notified via email when it's ready. And on behalf of all the team here at ShareVault and our friends in the industry, such as Brian, we thank you all for attending and wish you all a great rest of your day.